Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. UFC 270 is this Saturday, and while it's not the most stacked UFC pay-per-view I've ever seen, it's got two quality title fights on the top of the card, and in the co-main event, you have Brandon Moreno defending his flyweight title against Deiveson Figueiredo, and this is going to be my full breakdown and prediction, and I feel like there's so many things to really go over when it comes to breaking down this fight. And I think this fight is a lot more compelling than some people are making it out to be. Some people are making it out to be like it's going to be some crazy blowout. But I believe regardless of who wins this fight, I believe it will be competitive. And I cannot wait for this fight. So if you look at the tail of the tape, Brandon Moreno, the current champion, is 28 years old. Deiveson Figueiredo is 34 years old. Brandon Moreno is 5'7". Deiveson Figueiredo is 5'5". Brandon Moreno has a 70-inch reach, while Deiveson Figueiredo has a 68-inch reach. So Brandon Moreno is the younger fighter, he's the taller fighter, and he has a little bit of a reach advantage as well over Figueiredo. So if you look at Figueiredo before the Brandon Moreno fights, this guy only had one loss in MMA, and that was to Ciryl Gane back in March of 2019. And within this fight, you can see shades of the Deiveson Figueiredo we saw as champion, but we saw one major problem. He was able to be taken down and controlled on the ground. Now, I believe he got much better since this loss to Ciryl Gane. After that Ciryl Gane loss, he beat Alexandre Pantoja and Tim Elliott, and then we had a vacant flyweight title. He fought Joseph Benavidez for the flyweight title, but unfortunately, Deiveson Figueiredo missed weight, so only Joseph Benavidez was able to capture the flyweight belt that night, and Deiveson Figueiredo finishes him via TKO. It was absolutely brutal, but unfortunately he doesn't gain the flyweight belt. So they run it back. There was some controversy about a potential headbutt by mistake, and they were saying it changed the fight because it busted Joseph Benavidez open. So they decided to do Figueiredo versus Benavidez 2 for the flyweight belt, and yes, they both make weight this time. So if Deiveson wins, he can claim the belt, and this time he wins. He finishes Joseph Benavidez in the first round via rear naked choke, and it was an absolute brutal choke, one of the deepest rear naked chokes I've ever seen in my life. And there's a picture of it. I'll throw it up on the screen if I can find it. Was absolutely devastating, strangling Joseph Benavidez, and I think he went actually out cold in that fight. So after that fight, he fought November 21st of 2020, defended his title against Alex Perez, and I was really interested in this fight. I think Alex Perez is a high-level flyweight, and he went out there and guillotined him in the first round. And it was competitive, up until he snatched up this guillotine, but just quality win by Deiveson Figueiredo, and that was at UFC 255. Now, before I move on to more of what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to not talk about the Brandon Moreno fights just yet. I'm going to talk about Brandon Moreno because it was one of my favorite moments of 2021 to watch Brandon Moreno win that flyweight title, because this was a guy who lost 2 fights in the UFC, then was cut from the UFC. He lost to Sergio Pettis by unanimous decision. Then he lost to Alexandre Pantoja by unanimous decision. He was cut from the UFC. He went outside the UFC and won a fight at LFA. Then the UFC re-signed him. He came back in and fought Askar Askarov, got a draw. Then he goes on a 3-fight win streak, one against Kai Kara France, where he won by decision. That's aged very well, even though that wasn't that long ago. That was December of 2019. Then he defeats Ciryl Gane, an opponent in common with Deiveson Figueiredo. And then he defeats Brandon Royval at UFC 255 as well on the same card that Deiveson Figueiredo fought Alex Perez. And this fight, even though it's technically ruled as a TKO, Brandon Moreno was winning this fight, but Brandon Royval got a shoulder injury, and then he really couldn't fight back, and then there was some ground and pound, and then the referee stopped it. But even though Moreno was winning the fight, I don't really count that win all that, much, just because of the shoulder injury of Brandon Royval. So Brandon Moreno wins over Brandon Royval at UFC 255 on November 21st, 2020. Deiveson Figueiredo defends his title against Alex Perez, UFC 255, November 21st, 2021, or 2020. Sorry, I messed up there. And then the UFC really needs a main event for 3 weeks later at UFC 256. So they go to Deiveson Figueiredo. They ask him, can you main event UFC 256 against Brandon Moreno? And they ask Brandon Moreno, they offer him the title shot at UFC 256 because UFC loves to have a title fight main eventing all their pay-per-views most of the time. So they end up having the quickest title fight turnaround ever. There's never been a champion that's turned around that quickly. Deiveson Figueiredo takes the fight 3 weeks later against Brandon Moreno. And this was one of the best fights I've ever seen. And I think, It's going to sound crazy because of what I'm about to say in a minute, but I think this was the best flyweight fight we've ever seen. It was an amazing fight, but I think people overhype it a little bit. I think it's one of those cases where a lot of people, myself included, expected Deiveson to come out there and really dominate Brandon Moreno. And because he didn't, the fight seemed more exciting than it actually was. Don't get me wrong, it was still a great fight. I'm just saying I think people really overhyped it just because most people expected Brandon Moreno to absolutely get steamrolled, and he did not. I thought, I went back and watched it in preparation for this video, and my thoughts have not changed. I thought Deiveson Figueiredo clearly won the first 2 rounds. I thought the third round was 50-50, but it could have went either way. And with the point deduction, because Deiveson Figueiredo landed a hard cup shot on Brandon Moreno, Jason Herzog took a point. If Brandon Moreno technically won that round 10-9, with the point deduction, that was a 10-8 round. And then I gave Brandon Moreno the 4th round, and I gave Deiveson Figueiredo the 5th round. So with Brandon Moreno winning that 3rd round, it was a draw, and it ended up being a majority draw. One judge scored it for Deiveson Figueiredo. The other judges scored it a draw. So the UFC said, okay, we have to run this fight back. But that was an absolutely amazing fight. Figueiredo had a massive strategy change going into the second fight, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But in this fight, he was just walking Brandon Moreno down, cutting off the octagon, throwing hard punches, ripping the body kick over and over and over again. And supposedly we never got an answer on it. But in the 5th round, Brandon Moreno's forearm was so battered, there was even speculation that he might have broken his arm. I'm assuming that didn't happen, considering we never got any information about it. But he had a massive swelling on his forearm just from the hard body kicks that Deiveson Figueiredo was throwing. And another thing I want to mention, a lot of people talk about Deiveson Figueiredo saying he's not going to have good cardio just because of the way he fought. He won the 5th round against Brandon Moreno in that fight. There's no doubt in my mind. It was competitive, but I thought he clearly won it, so we have to applaud his cardio there. And also, a thing a lot of people forget is, and I believe this just because it's come from so many sources, the day before his fight against Brandon Moreno at UFC 256, December of 2020, he was apparently very sick. He had to be hospitalized. He got out of the hospital, still decided to fight. He was cleared by the doctors. So going into this second fight, people were like, okay, taking all that into account, he had a quick turnaround, 3-week turnaround. He was hospitalized the night before, and he still probably would have won if it wasn't for the point deduction. He should have won 3 rounds to 2. Myself included, a lot of people took it into account. Okay, he's definitely going to win this second fight. I picked Deiveson Figueiredo. It's one of the first videos, first big cards I did prediction videos for on my channel. I thought Deiveson Figueiredo was going to win the rematch, but he goes out there and absolutely takes a world-class beating from Brandon Moreno. There was really no high spots. I remembered it as a really outclassing by Brandon Moreno, but it was worse than I even thought. There was really no high spots for Deiveson Figueiredo in that rematch. Brandon Moreno was outstriking him for the majority of the fight. He was pumping the jab. Deiveson Figueiredo got 1 takedown, a little bit of control time, but that was literally it. Brandon Moreno just looked so good. He had 6 months to prepare. It was at UFC 263, June of last year. 6 months now instead of 3 weeks. I think, a lot of people talk about, and I just talked about it, Deiveson Figueiredo took a 3-week turnaround to defend his title. Well, Brandon Moreno was taking a 3-week title shot, after coming off a fight over Brandon Royval. So it affects both of them. And now each guy had 6 months to prepare for each other. And Brandon Moreno really came out there and absolutely outclassed him. Eventually gets a rear naked choke in the 3rd round. It was one of my favorite moments of 2021. Not because I dislike Deiveson Figueiredo. I love Deiveson Figueiredo. I love his fight style. It's amazing. But just to see Brandon Moreno and the happiness that he had when winning that flyweight title, one of my favorite moments of 2021. And after this fight, there was a lot of questions like, what went on here? And I feel like a lot of people were making more excuses for Deiveson Figueiredo. Was it the weight cut? To my knowledge, I don't think Figueiredo's ever came out and made a blatant excuse. There's some things he said that I'll talk about in a minute, but I haven't heard him say, I was injured or anything like that. But it was just crazy to see after that original fight, and it was super competitive, and Figueiredo arguably won without the point deduction, to see Moreno come out there and absolutely dominate him. And it's not like he just landed a knockout punch in the 1st round. it was a 3-round domination in every aspect, in the grappling, in the striking, and in the jiu-jitsu, and eventually submitting him via rear naked choke. And Deiveson Figueiredo, some people talk about, oh, this guy gave up the submission. He didn't want to be in there any longer. He was fighting the hands as hard as he possibly could and did not want to tap at all. I can't wait for this third fight. I did not expect this to happen. I expected the UFC to make Brandon Moreno versus Alexandre Pantoja, but apparently Pantoja was injured, couldn't make this time frame for Brandon Moreno, so they decided to give Figueiredo the Trilogy. And that's what makes this fight so compelling to me, because this is an absolute must-win for Deiveson Figueiredo. And coming into this fight, it's throwing me off a little bit because he's saying a lot of things. I'm going to come out there and kill Brandon Moreno, and just saying all these things about Brandon Moreno in the media. And it almost seems to me like he's trying to hype himself up, and it's just kind of throwing up a little bit of red flags. But for me to see that second performance and see the way Brandon Moreno dominated him, there's multiple things. One, I think a lot of people are just saying, okay, there's no way this doesn't happen in the third fight. Brandon Moreno definitely wins in the third fight, but I don't know if that's necessarily the case. The performance was so bad at UFC 263 for Deiveson Figueiredo. I feel like there almost has to be an excuse that we haven't heard of yet. I just feel like there has to be something, whether it be a weight cut. And to be honest, I flip and flop back and forth on my prediction for this fight, just because the Deiveson Figueiredo that I've seen in the past was not the same guy that we saw at UFC 263. So just for contrast for the game plan, at 255, Deiveson Figueiredo was just walking Brandon Moreno down, had his hands at his waist, throwing power shots and landing. At UFC 263, Deiveson Figueiredo just tried to keep the fight at range, try to pick his shots, and he was just getting outclassed by Brandon Moreno. It was a massive stylistic change, and it just wasn't the Figueiredo we're used to seeing. He's always moving forward, throwing heavy shots. I know coming into this fight, he changed his camp. Apparently, he's training with Henry Cejudo now to get ready for this fight, but I just don't know if that's going to make a massive difference for him. But I think, I want you guys to hear this in the video. I think there is a legitimate chance that Deiveson Figueiredo pulls off this upset. But my official prediction is going to be Brandon Moreno by 4th round TKO. I just think that Brandon Moreno looks so good in that second fight. How can you pick against them? And my mind was telling me pick Deiveson Figueiredo. There was something off in that last fight. You were right with that second pick to pick Figueiredo, but there was something off. Pick him in this third fight. But I just can't do it. After going back and watching that second fight, I just don't know what reasoning, other than the bad weight cut, is the possibility. I think Brandon Moreno is younger. I think he's faster. I think he's getting better with every fight. We've seen how dialed in he came for that second fight at UFC 263 after having 6 months to prepare. And also, after that original fight, everyone was making the excuses for Deiveson. He took it on 3 weeks. UFC 255 was only 3 weeks after, or 3 weeks before the second title defense against Brandon Moreno. He was hospitalized the night before. But a lot of people didn't give Brandon Moreno that same excuse. Well, it was a close fight, but Brandon Moreno only had 3 weeks to prepare for a world-class champion like Deiveson Figueiredo. He had 6 months, and he came out and absolutely outclassed him. In this fight, I truly believe that Brandon Moreno is going to come out looking better than ever. I think Figueiredo is going to have a much better strategy in this fight. I think he's going to come out and look to take Brandon Moreno's head off like he has in previous fights. I don't think he's going to chill back and look to pick his shots. I think that's a terrible strategy for a guy like Figueiredo. He's a guy that looks for finishes. And when Brandon Moreno is able to just sit there and not have any pressure in his face and not have a guy pushing him backwards, he can fight much better than if, you're in his face and pushing him backwards. And I think that's the strategy that Figueiredo needs to come in with if he wants to win. I think he needs to pressure Brandon Moreno and pressure him early and often. I think that Brandon Moreno needs to come in and just look to have a high fight IQ. Don't get drawn into a brawl with Deiveson Figueiredo. We know what kind of power Deiveson Figueiredo has. And I think Brandon Moreno has a great chin, but why test it if you don't have to? Look to pick him apart, from the outside. Kick the legs, kick the body, light him up with your jab. Brandon Moreno has an amazing jab. Deiveson Figueiredo has a great jab too. Both guys were jabbing each other to death in the first fight. I think Brandon Moreno will come out, use that little bit of a reach advantage, pump the jab out there, keep the distance, and wait until Deiveson Figueiredo starts to slow down a little bit. And the power is, not as crazy as it would be in the first round. I think he's going to kind of pick him apart. I think he's going to use the grappling. We've seen in the past, Deiveson Figueiredo's weakness is his takedown defense and his ability to be controlled. We've seen it in the Jussier Formiga fight. We've seen it in the first Brandon Moreno fight. We've seen it in the second Brandon Moreno fight. He has great scrambling ability. I think he's improved vastly as far as getting up off his back, even with all the takedowns that Brandon Moreno was able to get in the second or the first and second fight. Figueiredo was always able to get up, and I think the grappling aspect of this fight, both guys were very even. You know, Deiveson got Brandon Moreno down a little bit, and Brandon Moreno was able to scramble right back to the feet, and the same with Deiveson. But I feel like Brandon Moreno might just have that slight little bit of edge as far as controlling him on the ground, as we saw. I mean, Brandon Moreno was lightning fast, snatching up the back of Deiveson Figueiredo, and then he had the body triangle, then he immediately looked to sink in the rear naked choke. And I think in this fight, I think Brandon Moreno is just too fast. I think he's going to come in with a great game plan. I think he's ever improving. I think he's younger. It was crazy to me when I realized that Deiveson Figueiredo was 34 years old versus Brandon Moreno, who's only 28. I just believe Figueiredo, I also believe, after the first fight, there was a lot of excuses. In the second fight, there was almost none, which made me to believe a little bit that maybe there was an actual real reason, but who knows? I did see in the countdown, he said, he wasn't focused on that second fight as much. And maybe that's why he's attributing the loss to. But I always think, I know a lot of these fighters are delusional. When they lose a fight, there's always looking for an excuse. But I always feel like that's a terrible game plan to have, because if you can't admit that guy was the better guy, how are you going to make the necessary improvements to win the fight? So anyway, I think Brandon Moreno is going to come out. I think he's going to be the faster striker. I think he's going to have the better game plan. I think that Figueiredo is going to try to pressure him, but I think Brandon Moreno is going to use the takedowns to try to negate the pressure of Deiveson Figueiredo, and I really think he's going to light him up on the feet. I know that Deiveson Figueiredo has only ever been finished the one time by Brandon Moreno by rear naked choke, but I really think as the fight goes on, Deiveson Figueiredo is going to get really frustrated with Brandon Moreno just kind of picking his shots from the outside. And I think he's going to get, a lot more dangerous and a lot more risky, looking to draw Brandon Moreno into a brawl. And Brandon Moreno is not going to have it. Brandon Moreno is going to just be the overall better mixed martial artist. I think eventually he's going to clip Figgy right on the chin, put him down. I mean, we've seen him drop him in that second fight with a jab. And I think as you're moving in, and, as Brandon Moreno, he has some decent power. He rocked him, I think, in the first and the second fight. And I just believe he's going to walk into a punch. He's going to be a little bit tired. It's going to be the fourth round. He's going to be trying to win a championship fight. I think he's going to get clipped and then finish with ground and pound in the fourth round. I think it's going to be a great fight. I think Figueiredo has a legitimate chance. I mean, he has nasty power. He loves switching to the southpaw position. Figueiredo does, and just slamming in that body kick, similar to Giga Chikadze, which I talked about in my last prediction video. He loves doing that. So I really believe there's avenues to victory for Figgy, whether it be with the hands or whether he just rips a kick to the body and hurts Brandon Moreno badly. But I just think it's hard for me to look at that second fight and say, okay, we're a little bit down the line now. We're getting a third fight that he probably didn't deserve. How can he make all those necessary adjustments in this amount of time after just getting outclassed for 3 rounds and then finish via rear naked choke? I think he does a little bit better in this fight, but I think eventually Brandon Moreno finishes him in the 4th round via TKO. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Who do you think is going to win this fight? Do you think Deiveson Figueiredo has a chance at all? I'm curious what you guys think. Don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it, and thank you so much for watching.